Hi, my name is Beverly Watson, and I chose to investigate the fourth topic for our peer presentation. And the fourth topic was to examine the nutrient content of breast milk from vegetarian and vegan women who are lactating. So, in this presentation, I am first going to highlight the prevalence of lactating women that follow a vegetarian or vegan diet in the United States. And then I'm going to go into examining some common misconceptions that people find related to the nutrient content of breast milk from women who are lactating who are vegetarian or vegan. And then I'm going to go into a few research studies and essentially review and examine the data results related to essential fatty acid content of the breast milk, vitamin B12 content, iodine, choline, major and trace minerals, and essentially just see how the levels of these nutrients in the breast milk of vegan or vegetarian women compare to the content of these nutrients in the breast milk of women who are non-vegetarian or omnivores or something like that. And then lastly, I'm going to summarize the findings of all these research studies and essentially say whether or not it is true if vegan or vegetarian women actually have less nutrients in their breast milk than women who are non-vegetarian. So, according to national data, 79.2% of women in the United States have chosen to or intend to breastfeed once they have their baby. Breastfeeding it's recognized by the World Health Organization and the American Academy of Pediatrics and the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics as the most beneficial way of feeding an infant, especially during their first 6 months of life. And national data also proves that 18.8% of women in the United States breastfeed exclusively for the first 6 months of the infant's life. And according to a study conducted in the Department of Foods and Nutrition at the University of Georgia, on average, about 89% of women who identify as vegetarian actually have chosen or intend to breastfeed. So this study examined breastfeeding intentions and practice among vegetarians in the United States. And essentially the participants answered an online survey that consisted of multiple questions related to their type of vegetarianism, education level, race, ethnicity, and where they are in a region of the United States. And so the results essentially showed that 89% of these vegetarian women, as well as vegan, they have chosen or intend to breastfeed. But interestingly, no matter what type of vegetarian these women identified as, the rate of intention and practice of breastfeeding among these women was over 80%, which exceeds the breastfeeding initiation of the Healthy People 2020 objective for breastfeeding. And the results from the study also prove that the rates of vegetarian women who intend to or have chosen to breastfeed exclusively for the first 6 months of their infant's life range from 35 to 75%, depending on the type of vegetarianism. So essentially that means that the majority of women who intend to breastfeed especially during the first 6 months of their infant's life, these women that identify as vegetarian, at least 80% of them plan to breastfeed. So the majority of women who are going to breastfeed their child could actually be vegetarian. So some common misconceptions that we found related to the breast milk nutrient content of these lactating mothers who are vegetarian or vegan consisted of the following. And a breastfeeding mother typically needs about 450 to 500 extra calories every single day in order to help their babies grow. While all new moms, we know all new moms need more calories, they don't exactly have to be protein-based from animal products or just anything in general that is an animal product to be part of their calories. Breast milk, as we know, it's created using so many different parts of our bodies as women. It includes some of our white blood cells, our enzymes, our proteins, stem cells, amino acids, vitamins, minerals, fat, hormones, all of that such. And mothers who follow a vegetarian and vegan diet will still produce healthy breast milk that isn't lacking in most of these nutrients, and that's what's been proven, and that's what I've found going through these research studies for my presentation. And it's also important to remember that a plant-based diet will not essentially lead to a low supply of milk compared to a regular diet. That was another misconception, is that vegan or vegetarian women do not lactate or produce enough milk for their baby because they follow that diet, which is not true. And vitamins and nutrients like iron, calcium, and zinc and vitamin B12 are very, very essential for a healthy milk supply. And really, vegetarian and vegan mothers who are lactating just need to make sure that they're getting enough of those nutrients in their own diet, and therefore it will not affect their baby as much as they might think. So for my first research study, I found one that examined the content of essential fatty acids in the breast milk of vegan, vegetarian, and omnivorous lactating women. And as we know, essential fatty acids are critical for brain growth and for neurodevelopment in infants. And essentially, a mom's diet has, as we know, very significant impact on the fat composition of human breast milk. So we know our omega-3s, our omega-3 fatty acids, they help protect the heart from having some really scary erotic rhythms, and they also ease inflammation, and they inhibit the formation of harmful blood clots in our vessels. And the omega-3s also help lower levels of triglycerides, which is the most common type of fat-carrying particle in the blood. And our omega-6 fatty acids, they essentially help lower harmful LDL cholesterol, and then they boost that protective HDL. And then they also help keep blood sugar in check by improving our body's sensitivity to insulin. And essentially the terms like our omega-3 fatty acids and our omega-6 fatty acids describe the position of the first carbon-carbon double bond in the fat's backbone. And this essentially will influence the shape of how the fat molecule will affect our bodies and its function. This study also examined the prevalence of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, in the breast milk as well. So the objective of this study was to assess the supplement utilization patterns and assess the content of fatty acids and BDNF concentrations in the breast milk of these women who follow vegan, vegetarian, and omnivore diets. And so one breast milk sample was collected from each of the 74 lactating women, and this sample was analyzed for total fatty acid content and BDNF. And I've listed the data results here in percentages of total fatty acids in breast milk samples. And the data results actually showed that the vegan participants had the highest level of percentage of total fatty acids in their breast milk samples. And then it went vegetarians, they had 57.8%, and then the omnivore participants had 56.2%. And so on average, the percentage of total fatty acids in breast milk from non-vegetarian lactating women has proven to be between 45 to 60%. Now, this study right here that we examine, this one proves that the breast milk from vegan and even vegetarian women still contain high percentages of those total fatty acids compared to non-vegetarian and omnivorous women. So really, the results from this study prove that the breast milk samples from vegan participants, they have that high level of essential fatty acids. And they actually had significantly higher unsaturated fats and total omega-3 fatty acids than the vegetarian and omnivore participants, though the vegetarian participants still had a pretty decently high amount. Also, it was determined that breast milk from the vegan participants had lower saturated fats, lower trans fats, and a better omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acid ratio than the vegetarian and omnivore participants. And as we know, having more omega-3s, it's good for our heart and good for our triglyceride levels and helps decrease inflammation. But it is noted that BDNF was actually undetectable in all of this breast milk samples. So the next research study that I investigated was one that examined the vitamin B12 content in the breast milk of vegan and vegetarian and non-vegetarian lactating women in the United States. And as we know, infants, they need vitamin B12 for so many important things, but a big one is obviously supporting brain development and helping to produce healthy red blood cells. And the objective of this study was to analyze the breast milk content of that vitamin B12 and also the vitamin B12 supplement use pattern, among the women who follow these vegan and vegetarian and non-vegetarian diets. So this research study consisted of 74 lactating women who identified as either vegetarian, non-vegetarian, or vegan, and one sample of breast milk was taken from each of them and analyzed for its levels of B12. Now, the data results I have listed right here, they look at the percentage of prevalence of low vitamin B12 in those breast milk samples. And the vegan participants did end up having the highest percentage of their prevalence of low B12 in their breast milk. But if you look right under that, the median vitamin B12 values, so actually the vegans had the highest median value of vitamin B12 in their breast milk samples. And another thing to note is actually almost 20% of the study participants were classified as having low breast milk vitamin B12 concentrations, regardless of their diet pattern. And actually, approximately 85% of that 20% of participants categorized as having low vitamin B12, they were taking vitamin B12 supplements at doses that exceeded the recommended dietary allowance, which in conclusion suggests that a lot more research needs to be done to determine the adequate amount of vitamin B12 that should be in these women's breast milk content. And so, though the results from the study indicated that non-vegetarians did have the highest levels overall of vitamin B12 in their breast milk samples, the levels of B12 in breast milk of vegan and vegetarian participants were not extremely that far off as well. So this next research study examined the prevalence and predictors of low breast milk iodine concentration in women that follow a vegan, vegetarian, and omnivore diet. And iodine is a really essential component of the thyroid hormones. And there's T4 and T3. And essentially, a mother's thyroid hormone levels are very important for their baby because it affects their baby's growth, like fetal growth, and neurological development during pregnancy and even after they give birth. And breast milk iodine concentration from vegan and vegetarian lactating mothers has not previously been evaluated. So the goal of this research study was to assess the breast milk iodine concentration from these women who follow these three different dietary patterns. And then also a component of the research study was to assess the intake of iodine in the infants, just to see how much they actually are getting through their mother's breast milk. So this research study consisted of 30 lactating women who were either vegetarian, vegan, or omnivorous, and one sample of breast milk was taken from each participant and analyzed for its iodine concentration. And the data results from this study are on this scatter plot to the right, and it's recorded in milk iodine concentration and lactation stages. And according to the National Academy of Medicine, the adequate daily intake of iodine through breast milk for an infant is at 5. And if the infant, but this is considering that, or assuming that the infant is consuming the adequate daily breast milk intake of 0.78 liters per day. And so as you can see on this scatter plot to the right, there is a line drawn at 5. And the note to the side is assuming that all infants are, or assuming that these infants are consuming the adequate intake of breast milk a day, which is at 0.78 liters. And so the data results, I've listed them here, percentages. So percentage of inadequate breast milk iodine concentration. per maternal diet. And so for vegans, it was actually the highest at 75%. Vegetarians were 67%, and omnivores were 58%. Now, the thing is, most samples from the vegans and vegetarian participants contained a lower breast milk iodine concentration than the adequate intake for infants that were, less than or up to 6 months. But the results from the study were not considered significant because in 67% of those samples, so about 20 out of 30, the breast milk iodine concentration was lower than the National Academy of Medicine's adequate BMIC, which was assuming that infants on average do consume 0.78 liters of breast milk per day. So considering that 67% of the data from this study, all those results were lower than the average adequate breast milk iodine concentration, so it was hard to use these results as conclusive or significant. The authors of this research study did say that these findings were based on small numbers of samples, especially for the vegetarians, and so therefore there need to be larger studies conducted to be able to determine more reliable data. So the next research study that I examined looked at total water-soluble choline concentration, and the objective of this study was to assess this total concentration of water-soluble choline in the breast milk of lactating women in the United States that either followed a vegan, vegetarian, or non-vegetarian diet. And choline is an essential micronutrient in a mom's diet because this helps support her baby's growth and also is important for her as well because this choline helps maintain her immune function and intestinal health. So this study consisted of 74 lactating women who were either non-vegetarian, vegetarian, or vegan, and one sample of breast milk was taken from each participant and analyzed for its water-soluble choline concentration. And most of the outcomes that were measured in this data chart to the left, the authors looked at the concentration and distribution of choline from these three water-soluble forms, which I've listed right here, which consists of the free choline, the phosphocholine, or the glycerophosphocholine. And there was a huge wide range of water-soluble choline concentrations in the milk of all of these women from the three different diet categories, and there was no real difference in the concentration of total water-soluble choline depending on their diet. And essentially, this just suggests that a mom's diet while she is pregnant or breastfeeding does not really pose a risk for the baby having low choline concentrations or receiving low choline concentrations through the breast milk. A mom's plant-based diet does not increase the risk of low breast milk choline. So the main factors really that I found that influenced the forms of choline present in the breast milk were essentially a mom's BMI and her lactation stage that she was in. The final research study that I examined looked at major and trace mineral composition of the breast milk from lactating women who were either vegan, vegetarian, or omnivore. And like vitamins, minerals, they help our body grow and stay healthy. And our body uses minerals to do lots of things, from building strong bones and to sending nerve impulses through our body. And some minerals are even used to make hormones and maintain a normal heartbeat. And currently there is not a lot of information on the influence of a vegan or vegetarian diet on mineral composition of breast milk. So the goal of this study was to analyze the major and trace mineral composition of breast milk from the women that follow a more plant-based diet, and compare that with women who are omnivores. This study consisted of 74 lactating women who were either vegetarian, omnivore, or vegan, and one sample of breast milk was taken from each participant, and it was analyzed for major and trace mineral concentration. And the data results shown in this data chart above proved that mothers who follow a more plant-based diet, they actually ended up having higher concentration of selenium and lower concentrations of iron compared to mothers who follow an omnivore diet. And individuals following a plant-based diet generally have, like the mothers had the higher breast milk concentration of selenium and that lower concentration of iron. And this is important to note because iron is necessary to make hemoglobin, and hemoglobin carries oxygen in the red blood cells to all parts of our body. And iron is also very important because it helps support proper neurological development during infancy and early childhood. So, since the data results from this study suggest that vegetarian and vegan mothers should really monitor their iron consumption in their diet, they just need to make sure that it is high enough for themselves as well as enough to make the concentration through their breast milk enough to be able to give to their baby, which is really important for their baby's growth and development. And for these vegan and vegetarian mothers, really good plant-based sources of iron include lentils, chickpeas, beans like cashew nuts, chia seeds, hemp seeds, pumpkin seeds, and even those dark leafy greens like our spinach and kale, and some dried fruits like dried apricots and raisins and figs, and even fortified breakfast cereals. So there are lots of ways to still make sure that they are intaking enough iron in their daily diet so that it goes into their breast milk to be able to give to their baby, to give their baby enough nutrients. And so, essentially, in summary, lactating mothers who are vegetarian or vegan just need to make sure that they're consuming enough iron through their diet, or talk to their provider about supplementation if that is something that they would like to look into as well. So, in conclusion, after examining multiple of these research studies related to essential nutrients that infants need to grow and be healthy and make sure that they get these through their mother's breast milk, it is essentially just very important for lactating mothers who follow plant-based diets like being vegetarian and vegan. They just need to make sure that they're consuming enough of these important nutrients in their daily diet, like omega-3 fatty acids and iron and vitamin B12, for example, just so their baby is still getting all of the adequate amount of nutrients that it needs through the breast milk. And overall, honestly, what else I noticed was the lactating women in these research studies who followed a plant-based diet, they actually had healthier BMI scores than the lactating women in these studies who were non-vegetarian or omnivorous. And it has been proven that women with high body mass index, the BMI, actually have delays in establishing lactation after birth. And actually, overweight and obese women actually have a higher risk of early cessation in breastfeeding, which means that their body stops producing breast milk. So these are just some very important things to note from all of this evidence from these research studies that I think are very important and very helpful for providers and clinicians to be able to give adequate care to their patients. So thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and here is a slide of my sources below. Thank you so much.